Good morning. This is the Adult Sunday School lesson from Mount Vernon Baptist Church for October the 11th. Today our lesson is entitled The World That Perished. It comes from Genesis 7, 1 through 6 and verse 19, Genesis 8, 4 and 20 through 22. Our application today is that the student will learn that God is faithful to His Word. While iniquity will be punished, those who find grace will be saved. Prayer request this week is the same as each week before today and becomes more urgent. The virus is raging. It is raging now through the top levels of our nation's government, and we have nothing improving or better to say about it other than the fact that it continues to rage. Therefore, we should be much in prayer for all those that we know are suffering from it, and we should be much in prayer supporting those who are doing the daily battle against it. So please take that to heart and let's be much in prayer for this. Now today, when we look at this particular lesson, we're going to see something quite different. We're going to see how it is that God intended for His plan to be implemented among mankind. There's several steps along that long path, and we'll see those this morning. Today, when we look at our scripture verses, we are looking at chapter 7 and chapter 8 with some selected verses, starting in 7 at verse 1. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For yet 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according unto all the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. And now in verse 8, we look first at verse 4. The ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast, every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. May the Lord's word be blessed upon us as we look to it for understanding and beginning of this important lesson. We understand clearly that the flood came because man did not listen to the Spirit of God. The Lord was much displeased with the level of evil seen on the earth, how it had contaminated His creation, which He had said before was very good. The purpose of the flood was not to eliminate sin, but to show that God will deal with sin and that the wages of sin is death. We learned this lesson early in Genesis as Adam and Eve were separated from God by their sin. They were told that if they chose willingly to sin, they would surely die. And their spiritual death was immediate. Their physical death also began that day, and in time they did indeed physically die. Both deaths were chosen by them. Here in the time before the flood, mankind again was choosing to disobey God and to ignore the lessons that were taught in the garden. The father of Noah, Lamech, was likely born before Adam died. Many generations had the opportunity to learn firsthand from the one who originally chose sin over obedience. Here in these two study chapters, we have what is called the second beginning of Genesis. Man had forfeited the blessing of God and his position as the crown of creation, but grace restores him and reinstates him once again. At various times, God has condescended to enter into certain agreements with man. These are known as his covenants. It's helpful in our study journey as we go forth to recognize these and what they mean inside of God's plan. There are 7 covenants given to us in Scripture. The first is the covenant with Adam, and it concerned man's continued enjoyment of the Garden of Eden on the condition he kept the command not to eat of the forbidden tree. Adam failed to honor this covenant. The next covenant was one we see today, the covenant with Noah. It concerns the plan for earth and its seasons and the fatal punishment of sin through death, plus grace found through faith. The third covenant was the covenant made with Abraham, and it concerns Israel's occupation of Palestine as found in Genesis 15. The fourth covenant that God made was with Moses concerning Israel's enjoyment of God's favor, conditioned by obedience to his law as found in Exodus 24. The fifth covenant was the one that was with the Levi tribe. It concerns the priesthood, promising that it should remain in this tribe as found in Numbers 24. The sixth covenant was with David, and it concerns the kingdom and the everlasting throne as found in 2 Samuel 23. And then the last covenant is what we call the Messianic covenant, and it concerns the New Testament covenant, including the millennium as found in Isaiah 42. Our study today focuses us upon the second covenant, the one with Noah. This covenant brought a new start with the destruction of the human family, with the exception of the 8 souls in the ark. The time in the ark was 371 days. We need to understand that as we look at this lesson. Genesis 7:11 begins the rain. Genesis 8:4, 5 months later, the ark rested on Mount Ararat. In 8:5, after 2.5 months, the mountains were seen. In 8:13, after another 3 months, Noah removed the covenant of the ark. In 8:14 through 19, Noah and his family went outside the ark, and 57 days later, assuming Jewish 30-day months, we come to a total of 371 days. Now, after leaving the God-given safety of the ark, the first act by Noah was to build an altar and to sacrifice clean animals to God. God said the sweet savor arose to him. He blessed Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From Shem came the Jews, and from Ham came the Arabs, and from Japheth came the Gentiles. This covenant with Noah was one of God toward Noah, not one of Noah toward God. God was the giver, man was the receiver. Verses 11, 12, 13, and 15 speak to us of God's promises, and all were directed by him to Noah and the earth after the flood. All who came after Noah were recipients of these blessings that came through one man, Noah. Here's a perfect type of Christ, as redemption is found through one, but flows to many. These facts define grace bestowed. The covenant began with the sacrifice, Genesis 8:20, and Jehovah's response. The contents of the covenant was continued seasons, never to end, and never again a flood would come to bring destruction. After 4,000 years, these promises still hold. Such is the forever faithfulness of the Lord. There were 3 kinds of requirements provided by God to assure that mankind knew of God's view of the plan. 1, blood must not be eaten. 2, capital punishment was installed. 3, humans are to multiply and to fill the earth. Genesis 9 will teach us that God sees the blood as life, and it must be held sacred. Now, he who sheds it must be punished in like manner. We remember that both Cain and Lamech had murdered, but they faced no judgment by man. Now this crime will be subject to man's review. Genesis 9 will also teach us that God sees Noah as the new leader of mankind, with all animals subject to him, and we should remember also in fear of him. God has now granted the approval to eat flesh as well as plants. God further placed a token of this covenant in the sky, known as the rainbow. This is a forever token, given gracefully by the Lord to remind man that the Lord both sees and remembers his promises. Here is how God ratified his covenant. Both the divine eye and all mortal eyes of mankind may see the rainbow and be reminded of its meaning. The bow is facing heaven, but it also touches earth. It is a bow with no arrows. God hung it in the heavens so that all may see simply by looking upward. Paul understood the power of this token, and he writes of it in Titus 2:11. He says, "The grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men." Jewels of the same color as the rainbow were commanded by God to be installed in the breastplate of the high priest of the Jewish people. These were called Urim and Thummim, and through these the priests were given God's reply to requests that were made by the priest. These were known as light and perfection, and represented God himself to his chosen people. The first act made by Noah after leaving the ark was a sacrifice. It was an act of worship and thankfulness for God's deliverance and protection. With such a worship moment placed before all other acts, God was pleased. The very heartbeat of the Christian should be to please God and to offer him acceptable sacrifice for his acceptance. In the time of the new covenant in which we live after the once and final and sufficient sacrifice by Christ, our command on this is given to us in Romans 12:2. Present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Next week we will view God's covenant with the present world. I hope to see you there.